Right, so as you've probably seen by the title and thumbnail, I'm gonna be talking about cholesterol today because I've seen so much shit about cholesterol being like the worst thing for you ever and it causes heart disease. So we're just gonna clear this all up and basically explain why you actually need cholesterol. So obviously the main culprits of cholesterol being uh, fatty sources of animal products. So milk, eggs, this is like beef, this looks like liver, egg yolks, cheese, etc. Right? And so we're going to get into it. So, firstly, what does cholesterol actually do? So cholesterol actually has lots of really important good functions in your body. So when people demonize cholesterol, they're missing like most of the picture. So firstly, you can see here, this is basically like the layer of fat around the wall of your cells. All cell walls are made of cholesterol. So you can see there's like little bits in the fat layer. There's cholesterol in between these little fatty acid chains. There's cholesterol you can see here, basically keeping the structure together. So they support, and so when you have tissue damage, cholesterol will be used to repair the cells at the site of injury, and so repair the tissue. Like if you damage your muscle or damage an organ or whatever, cholesterol is a response which actually repairs your tissues and your cells. Secondly, is it makes your sex hormones. You can see here, cholesterol through this process turns into testosterone. If you're a male, estrogen. Hopefully, you're not producing too much of that as a male. Testosterone, DHT, and estradiol, which is the potent form of estrogen. So whether you're a male or female, you need cholesterol to form your hormones. Next, it supports bile, digestion of bile. So bile is like some of the acid that's in your stomach, and you can see here, yep, cholesterol is incorporated as the backbone in bile acid synthesis. Uh, it activates the release of serotonin, so the confidence hormone, GABA, which is it's like gamma aminobutyric acid or butyric acid, which is basically another neurotransmitter which regulates your mood, and dopamine, which is like a happiness chemical, right? Next, it's fuel for your. Oh, I didn't say vitamin D. I skipped over that one. So yeah, vitamin D. So you get the cholesterol turns into dehydrated cholesterol, which circulates in your bloodstream, and then UV light penetrates your skin through the sun, and then it interacts with this dehydrated cholesterol to form pre-vitamin D3, vitamin D3, and then calcitriol. Right? So it forms vitamin D. It's fuel for your neurons. So actually, 25% of your total cholesterol is found in your brain because cholesterol is actually vital for your brain function, your neurons in particular, and it protects you against infections. Like it's good for your immune system. And here's just more about GABA. So yeah, affects mood and mental health. Depression and autism has been associated with abnormalities in GABA. It plays a role in Huntington's, epilepsy, Parkinson's, and so GABA is obviously really good and important. And so if cholesterol manages its release, cholesterol is important. And similarly here, shows that if you have low serotonin, it's potentially a pathway to suicide. So low cholesterol can be a pathway for suicide. And it says here, again, human and animal data have suggested that low cholesterol may be linked to violent behaviors, which may include suicide. So low cholesterol can literally make you suicidal. So it's pretty important to have cholesterol. So don't think that low cholesterol is something you should be thriving for. Next, we're going to go over the whole myth about LDL. Like if you've been around or you've done research, you've probably heard about, oh, the good cholesterol is HDL and the bad cholesterol is LDL. What you first need to know, there's only one type of cholesterol. LDL and HDL is the way it's transported. So LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. And so basically LDL will transport cholesterol not just to your arteries. This image is a bit misleading. It will transport it towards your tissues, so through your arteries to your tissues, and HDL will bring it back towards your liver and it will clean up any excess that's left in your arteries or in your tissues, right? So blaming LDL for bad health indicators is like blaming the ambulance for injuries. So LDL shows up at the site of the crime because, as we explained above here, it's part of your cell membrane structure and support. So when you have a damaged cell, cholesterol gets sent to the cell to repair it. Therefore, it's LDL because it's going towards the tissue. And so just because it's at the site of a crime doesn't mean it caused the crime, like an ambulance, right? And you can see this scientific diagram. Basically, cholesterol here is used, the ester. It helps these T cells actually kill tumors. So it helps your T cells as part of your immune system, and so it helps your immune response actually kill tumors. Cholesterol is crucial. in that. So again, cholesterol shows up to help your body kill cancer, but doesn't cause the cancer, if that makes sense. But we'll get more into it. So next is dietary versus serum cholesterol. So serum cholesterol is how much cholesterol you have in your body. And so logically, what you would think is the more cholesterol you eat, the more cholesterol you have in your bloodstream. But it's actually completely false. And so this guy, Nick Norwitz, he is a PhD. He went to Harvard, and basically what he did, he ate 24 eggs, so 2 cartons of eggs a day for 30 days. So 720 eggs. And if you didn't know, eggs are one of the things which egg yolks are demonized for having high cholesterol, especially. But it says here, his LDL dropped 18% by the last 2 weeks of the experiment. So by the end of the experiment, his LDL, the bad cholesterol, dropped by 20% almost. It dropped by 2% and then a further additional 18%. So 20% all up. A fifth less bad cholesterol, even though he ate all of this cholesterol, which supposedly raises your cholesterol. So it clearly defies this old wisdom that eating cholesterol raises LDL. So if eating cholesterol doesn't raise LDL, what does? Well, it's actually caused by obesity, alcohol consumption, high sugar intake, chronic stress, poor sleep, and not saturated fat. If you search it up, what causes LDL, these will come up, as well as smoking, but also saturated fat. But if you do a little bit more digging, you can actually find saturated fat doesn't cause it. So a lot of the wisdom will say that saturated fat causes you to have high LDL, whereas you should be eating polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-6 PUFAs, which is supposedly good for reducing high LDL. But let me read this to you, and you'll completely, like when I read this, I literally was like, what? Out loud, I literally said it. I was so shocked. So listen to this. Saturated fat appears to decrease small dense LDL, SDLDL, and increase large buoyant LDL. So I didn't even know there were 2 types of LDL. So there's 2 types of cholesterol, LDL and HDL. But LDL, there's large buoyant LDL and SD, small dense LDL. So a high concentration of SD LDL, small dense LDL, and a low concentration of large buoyant LDL is associated with an increased risk of coronary heart disease. But saturated fat has the opposite effect. It decreases small dense LDL and increases large buoyant LDL. So logically, there's a decreased risk of coronary heart disease. Moreover, says saturated fat may not necessarily increase the risk of heart disease because it contradicts. Secondly, compared with LDL cholesterol, SD, again, small dense LDL, and oxidized LDL seem to have a greater impact on atherosclerosis, which is like plaque buildup, so where you get plaque building up and eventually heart attacks, and cardiovascular disease. So basically, it's not just LDL, which is actually the bad cholesterol, but it's these 2 specific types of LDL, small dense LDL and oxidized LDL, which we'll talk about later. We'll go back to those, okay? But for now, just remember those 2 things. Next, while saturated fat has been shown to increase total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, there's also an increase in HDL. And so HDL obviously is the cleaning mechanism. So if you increase your LDL, but you also increase the HDL at the same rate, which is what saturated fat does, then you'll be able to clean up the LDL, and so there's no problem. Moreover, unsaturated fatty acids, supposedly the heart healthy ones that all like these heart health organizations will tell you to eat, they have a less prominent effect for increasing HDL compared to saturated fat. Thus, they actually might be worse for you than saturated fat. And so here, it says the former, which is saturated fat, may improve small dense LDL and HDL-C, whereas omega-6 polyunsaturated fats, so supposedly the heart healthy ones, may lower LDL cholesterol, but increases LDL susceptibility to oxidation, which is actually a bigger determinant for atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease, and also may lower your cleanup mechanism, your HDL-C. So let me just reiterate that because I know it's a lot of information. I'll just reiterate the last sentence. So saturated fat, the bad thing that causes LDL cholesterol, may actually improve this. It will reduce the small dense LDL, SD LDL, which is actually the problematic one, and it will increase the cleaning mechanism. Whereas the heart healthy polyunsaturated fatty acids will actually lower your LDL cholesterol, but it will also increase that same cholesterol susceptibility to be oxidized, which is actually the more damaging type of cholesterol, oxidized LDL, has a greater impact on these diseases, and it also lowers your cleanup mechanism. So saturated reduces the bad one, increases the cleanup. PUFA increases its susceptibility to become bad, and also reduces the cleanup. So actually, it's worse for you than saturated fat, but no one will tell you this. So I'm sorry if I spent a bit of time on that, but I think it's important to get your head around it. And so, yeah, if you eat more cholesterol, you produce less. In a healthy person, your body basically stays in homeostasis, which means keeping everything the same. So the liver has these receptors, LDL, low density lipoprotein receptors, to determine the levels of LDL you have and then adjust how much it needs to produce. And here's the kicker: LDLRs get destroyed by proprotein convertase substillin kexin type 9. PCSK9. I'm just going to call it like P9 because I can't be asked to say like 5 letters. So P9 is increased again through high carb diets, high fructose diets, and fructose is a carb, it's sugar, it turns into, that is a carb, sugar is a type of carb. High insulin, which is triggered by high carb and sugar diets, and obesity caused by high carb and sugar diets. And if we look at high LDL, obesity, again, caused by high carb sugar diets, alcohol consumption, that's diet, high sugar intake, that's sugar, chronic stress, that's its own thing, poor sleep is its own thing. And so basically it comes down to diet and stress and sleep. Very interesting. These are the most obvious things, but yet you get told to be put on supplements and all this random bullshit. But really, it's diet, sleep, and stress. And so insulin, like I said, high insulin will increase P9. And obviously, because these things increase P9, P9 will then damage your LDL receptors, basically meaning your body can't detect, your body thinks you have less LDL than it does, so it overproduces LDL, which can then actually cause these issues. So, but firstly, if you don't know how insulin really works, insulin, yeah, it's the key that unlocks the glucose channel. So when you eat carbs, your body will turn them into sugar, it will spike your blood sugar, and it becomes glucose. Then your cells will try to absorb the glucose to try to stabilize your blood sugar. And so insulin will basically unlock the cells to allow glucose to enter the cell wall. And so what happens with the problem is with insulin sensitivity is you eat food, it spikes your blood sugar. You make insulin to open the cells to deal with the sugar. The cells begin to resist the insulin because you've had so much spiked blood sugar over so long that they're sick of just taking more and more sugar in. They can't take it. The sugar gets stored as fat. You feel really tired and hungry, so you eat more food. You make more insulin. The cells resist it more, and so that's what leads to insulin sensitivity, which is diabetes. If you didn't know. So that's a big tangent. Next, we're going to get to what actually does cause atherosclerosis, because obviously we see here that LDL, that SD LDL and oxidized LDL, but like how specifically does that work? So this is generally the chain of events. So endothelial damage, which is damage to the actual cells in your artery, that leads to oxidative stress, leads to inflammation in that area, which leads to retention of LDL, which leads to an immune response, which leads to plaque formation, which obviously then leads to blockages and potential heart issues. So let's break this down one by one. So endothelial damage to cell walls primarily caused by chronic inflammation, which is caused by stress, poor sleep, obesity, and diet. Where have we seen that before? Oh yeah, right here. Diet, stress, sleep, and obesity, which is obviously caused by diet. Next, hypertension, caused by, you guessed it, stress, poor sleep, obesity, and diet. And diabetes, high blood sugar, stress, poor sleep, obesity, and diet. Again, it's the obvious stuff, but it's completely crazy how we get told all this shit about like supplements and whatnot when it's so simple. Stress, poor sleep, obesity, and diet. It's literally all of these problems. And yet you'll be told not to eat eggs or milk, which humans have been eating for thousands of years. And you should instead eat these polyunsaturated fatty acids and these like seed oils. And by the way, search up how seed oils are made, canola oil. I guarantee you won't buy it again. Just look, it's like this sludge going through a big machine. But anyway, it's a topic for another video. So, and the dietary factors, the diet that cause all of these are, yeah, unnatural processed foods. But yet we get told, oh yeah, eat all this modern stuff and stay away from meat and eggs and fish and all these foods we've been eating for literally since humans began existing. right? So then you see endothelial dysfunction, oxidative stress leads to atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome. And so endothelial damage will create an imbalance between reactive oxidative species production and reduced antioxidant defenses. So it produces more reactive oxidative species while the defenses to reduce the oxidants, the antioxidants, are lowered. So there's more offense, less defense. Obviously, the oxidative stress builds up, which is why we're at the second step of the equation. So next, the defenses are overwhelmed, which leads to damaged cells, endothelial cells, and tissues. This activates the immune system, which is part of the inflammatory phase. Immune response is its own thing, but inflammation is part of the immune response. So, due to the oxidative environment from the inflammatory cells, now we're LDL retention, LDL particles are actually attacked by free radicals, oxidizing it to become oxidized LDL. So without getting too technical, basically you can see this is normal LDL and it undergoes oxidation because of all the increased reactive oxidation species and the decreased antioxidant defenses. There's more oxidative species in the environment, which can lead to oxidized LDL. So the lipids, aldehydes, and ketones become oxidized, and the binding agent ApoB becomes modified. Basically forms this weird version of LDL, which again we saw above here. Oxidized LDL has a great impact on atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. So again, it's actually from this endothelial damage where all of this stems from, which again is actually a modern shit diet, not cholesterol. And so macrophages, which is the white blood cells that like engulf pathogens, they are in the artery wall. They'll engulf this oxidized LDL to try to like contain it, which causes massive unregulated uptake of lipids because they're ingesting all these lipids, and because they're oxidized lipids, it's especially damaging, which basically leads to cholesterol ester accumulation, where, trying to simplify it, the cholesterol goes through a chemical reaction in the macrophage in the white blood cell, which leads to these things called esters, which then basically, esters is what's also used in soap to make soap foamy, and it forms these cells called like foam cells. And so, bear with me, we're almost there. So foam cells, as you can see by this diagram, they produce these signaling molecules, these pro-inflammatory cytokines, which increase inflammation, and it also promotes this proliferation of smooth muscle cells, creating a fatty streak across the line of the cell that evolves into plaque. So it's like, I don't know, if you imagine this as like the cell wall, it like puts a little layer of fat on top of it. Like imagine like a layer of paint on top of it, which then eventually hardens and forms into plaque, right? Then the foam cells are overloaded with lipids. You can see like more and more and more lipids get into it because you can see LDL gets oxidized and it gets taken up, and eventually they get overwhelmed, and so then they undergo necrosis, which is just cell death. And so the body can't clear these dead foam cells effectively, so then they just release their contents. That should have a T there, but whatever, forming an unstable necrotic core within the plaque. So the plaque has like this weird like dead cell core inside it, which makes it even more hard and difficult. And then lastly, the foam cells release enzymes that break down the fibrous cap on them, making plaque prone to rupture. And if the plaque ruptures, it triggers blood clot formation, which then leads to a heart attack or stroke. So in summary, poor diet, stress, and sleep leads to damage to the cell. Cholesterol tries to come to the rescue, but because of all the stress and inflammation here, it ends up getting oxidized. Then your body tries to deal with it by absorbing it, but then it gets overwhelmed by the sheer amount of it. So then it ends up just slowly forming film and plaque, and then the cells end up dying, forming more plaque, and then eventually to try to clear the plaque, they break themselves down, but then it triggers a blood clot. None of this got to do with dietary cholesterol. None of this got to do with eating milk and eggs. All of this has got to do with eating a modern shit diet. And again, SD LDL, and oxidized LDL, not dietary cholesterol, and not just LDL in general. So be very, very careful with what you listen to. All right, so another really interesting point is cholesterol actually behaves completely differently in healthy versus unhealthy bodies. So if you're healthy, your liver, like I said before, it will maintain a strict balance, homeostasis. So the more you eat, the less it produces, and vice versa. If you're unhealthy, and you have insulin resistance, like I said, you have increased internal cholesterol synthesis, and you have a high production of triglyceride-rich, very low-density lipoproteins, VLDLs, which are actually very bad. So, in the good side, LDL particles are large and fluffy. Remember, if you remember, we talked about here the large buoyant LDL. That's what we're talking about. Large, fluffy, buoyant. That's the good type of LDL. So, yeah, little did you know, there's not good and bad cholesterol. There's HDL, LDL, and then good and bad LDL. So you get the good version of LDL, which transports necessary cholesterol to help maintain the cells, build the walls without getting stuck in the artery walls, and then HDL collects any excess and returns it to the liver. But in the unhealthy body, due to the high triglycerides and your insulin resistance, LDL particles become small and dense, SDLDL, again causing damage, the real bad LDL, the real bad cholesterol. Smaller particles are more prone to oxidation and damage. HDL levels drop, which causes impaired function. So basically, you can't remove it as much and you're producing excess. So it's a double whammy. Healthy. Intestines regulate absorption efficiently and the body excretes excess through bile. Remember, bile is made out of cholesterol, so your body will produce bile out of the cholesterol to get rid of it. But you have a reduced ability, if you're unhealthy, to eliminate excess cholesterol. So, for healthy, cholesterol is essential for your cell membrane integrity. Unhealthy, it creates foam cells, creating plaque and leading to heart disease. So again, and the difference between being healthy and unhealthy is again, stress, sleep, and good diet. And again, good diet is not avoiding all animal foods, but actually the opposite, because as we saw, it increases the good type of LDL and reduces the bad type of LDL. So don't listen to all of this like mainstream shit. This is clearly proven. So basically what it is, there's a body biological mismatch. Like you can see these two guys, again, this is what I'm talking about up here being healthy versus unhealthy. These two guys have like similar genetics. I mean, obviously they're both African, but this is clearly a result of lifestyle, diet, sunlight, processed food, artificial light, sedentary behavior, poor sleep, chronic stress, especially in the modern world with phones, but that's a topic for another day, and a bunch of refined overload carbs, especially processed carbs. Whereas this dog over here, he's clearly living a good, healthy life, and he looks like an absolute specimen, whereas this guy looks, terrible and sick. And so obviously these things, these factors lead to insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, vascular dysfunction, and all of the other things I already listed. And so finally, cholesterol becomes part of a pathological repair loop, and then it's blamed for showing up at the site of damage. It's blamed for being there to solve the problem. It's blamed for being there to try to fix your own shit lifestyle. But really, it's actually a repair mechanism. So don't blame cholesterol. It's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could say. So in conclusion, in a metabolically healthy organism, in living in complete evolutionary alignment, living how the human should live, cholesterol functions as intended. In a biologically mismatched environment, it's so blurry, but anyway, you understand the picture. In a mismatched environment, it becomes entangled in chronic repair and inflammation. The molecule isn't broken, the environment is. So with that being said, it's time to become human again. Thank you for watching. If you're still here, I appreciate it. And yeah, live like you ought to live. Live like a real human, not like a modern one.